Hello and welcome to the latest episode of the Artist Mindset Podcast. This is Chris Goslow and I am talking to you on a lovely Wednesday afternoon here in Sacramento, California. Pleased to be here and glad that you are here, more importantly, listening to this podcast. Today I wanted to talk about the art of improvisation. So first, a general background. As an artist, I have always experimented and tried things out, both as a pianist, as a lyricist, as a rapper, composer, songwriter. All of these things have always had a big dose of experimentation for me from day one. And that's the first point I want to make here. The reason I think this is so important to do this topic, to talk about this topic, is because experimentation is such a valuable way of learning your craft. I wouldn't be who I am as an artist if it wasn't for experimentation. I remember being as young as maybe 5 or 6, sitting at the keyboard at home, on my dad's lap, playing something. It might have been Mary Had a Little Lamb. And around the same time I started experimenting and making things up. You see, my dad made things up, and I heard him making up music all the time, and I just sort of did the same myself. From an early age, it was instilled in me that this was part of the learning process. While as a pianist, I did go to school, I learned music theory, I studied composition, counterpoint, classical history, studied a lot of classical music. Of course, I was classically trained. I also learned a fair amount of popular music on my own and through accompanying for musicals and whatnot. So anyway, my education from the beginning included this experimental aspect. And that's what the art of improvisation is for me. It's about experimentation and creation. As I always tell my piano students, someone had to write this stuff that you're playing. Someone wrote it. And that was a person breathing just like you. And the implications are that there's no reason why, any student couldn't also write something or just understand that there's a human behind these creations. And that very often that person who creates music that we end up playing is just loves experimenting, trying things out, and then you end up with completed works very often. But where do the works first start out? They don't usually start out in finished form unless you're Mozart. Most of us kind of tinker and try things out and see what works, and over time we develop a stronger, clearer sense of our own style and our choices and what we want and what we like. Yet for me, and I have done that as well, I've always started with experimentation. So here I am at the piano, and I'm just going to start with a quick little improvisation, just making this up, and then we're going to talk about it. So here we go. Okay, so now, first off, like I said, It all started with experimentation, and nothing I'm saying right now is the right way to do anything. So I'd say the right way for you is to try out and see what works for you. By the way, I don't know if I made this clear. I'm not just talking about piano, but of course I'm the piano player here. So I'm using the piano as my means of experimentation. But we'll talk more about that later. So first, as far as what I just did, the first thing that I'll just describe my process to start out with. I just knew I was going to sit down and play, and then I literally just saw myself playing a D major chord and a little bit of a trill in the right hand. Now that's not all that uncommon for me to get a little frilly with the right hand and do little classical type trills. I do that kind of thing all the time. And so it kind of just was born out of that. And and also it had a bit of a soft sweetness to it at first. So I just kind of went with that. And then I ended up doing some little tremolos and sort of these classical type little progression until I added this little bit of a sort of bluesy thing with these little chords that are giving it like some strange chord combinations. I don't want to get too specific on the music theory here, but you heard what I mean. So I gave it a little more style, a little more character. It wasn't quite as just sweet. It was maybe a little bluesy, maybe with a sense of humor, maybe a little ironic. And then I sort of kind of ended up doing a bit of a 12-bar blues or a blues chord progression. And, all of that, of course, started after my right hand just decided it wasn't just going to play nice and just stay in, classical land. So that's basically what I just did. But I didn't give it a whole lot of thought beforehand. And that's part of my process. But, I have been playing on this instrument for my whole life. And so I know a lot about it. I know a lot about what's going to come out of it. And I don't overly think about that, too, when I start. I just kind of sit and put my hands down. And I trust the guidance to happen. And usually what happens is as I start, I hear a kind of idea or mood. And then I build on that. Very often it'll be a motif, like a rhythmic or melodic idea that I'll say, well, that's pretty cool. And then I'll start using it in other chords or in other ways and just kind of building off of that. And so that kind of summarizes what I just went through there. So now, to kind of make the larger point I'm trying to make here, my attitude when I'm doing this is that it's all good, that there's no way to get it wrong, and that I'm simply going to open up myself to what strikes me, what the mood strikes, and what makes sense right now, and what feels good. I'm just playing. Think about when we're kids and we're playing in the recess. We don't overly think about how it's all supposed to happen. Like, oh my gosh, I can't believe I know how to play kickball. I just, there's the rules, you play it. It's always interesting. Something new happens. You don't know exactly what's going to happen, but you go with it and you play to the best of your ability, and something comes of it that should be fun, hopefully. And similarly here, I'm not overly thinking about how it's supposed to go or whatnot, or how good it's supposed to be. And that I think is a really important point, because there's all this kind of mythology grown up around creativity, like, oh, this talented person over here, they're so talented. This person is so brilliant. They were able to make up this music. Oh my gosh, it's so amazing. Now, certainly it's possible that, some of us are musically inclined and creatively inclined. However, if you're listening to this, you're probably creatively inclined in your medium. But the point is that to remove to demystify the process, instead of thinking of creativity as this thing out there that these brilliant people are able to do, it's something that we do, something that I do, something that you do, no doubt, in your craft. And when I sit down to improvise, I just trust that something good is going to come of that. And I have a positive expectation about the whole process of improvisation. And I think that that's probably true for anybody who is comfortable improvising, and frankly, anybody who's comfortable with anything they do. You probably have a positive expectation. And I don't think that my positive expectation is so strange or unusual. It's just simply that I learned that it was okay to experiment. And I tried it out from a very early age, and I've never stopped. And it's the key to my, as I said earlier, to my own creativity. So, yeah. So again, my point here is that if I can do it in my creativity, you can do it in yours. Okay? Even though I'm sitting here at the piano, the same principle applies to you in whichever medium or media you work in. My wife is a phenomenal photographer and digital artist, and for years now, I have been alongside her as she has explored the world of digital apps and all things app related. And she will just sometimes spend hours at night finding new apps and trying new apps. It's a little kind of a joke between us, because sometimes she will be holding her phone and spend literally several minutes closing all the apps that she has opened. Dozens and dozens, maybe hundreds, I don't know. It's because she's constantly curious, constantly looking for new things and interested in learning in her craft. And she uses these apps for art, mostly artistic purposes. That's, to be clear, what I'm talking about. It's art apps and visual photography apps or sort of painterly type apps. And that's an example of her learning curve is she's learning as she experiments, as she tries these things out, always creating new images, making multiple copies from different apps and using them in different ways. And so the reason I'm bringing this up is just, again, to make the point. It's not just about piano. She's doing the same thing in her world that I am doing in this world, and that I am encouraging you to do in the media of your choice. And because contrary to this idea that we have to learn from a master, learn in school, study, take a course, a lot of things can be learned through trial and error. As Seth Godin put it, poking the box. Poke the box and see what comes of it. Now, he was talking about entrepreneurs and shipping new ideas into the marketplace. I think it applies equally to artists who are simply working on their own. Because this process teaches you so much. Okay, so now, to be clear, I'm not saying not to learn from someone or take a class or a workshop. I have taken many classes and learned from many people in the music realm, admittedly mostly in college and before. And since then, I've continued to learn in other realms like business and music business and personal growth and whatnot. I believe it's really wonderful to learn from people. And what I'm saying is, experiment as well. You don't need to wait for someone else to give you permission. Sometimes I talk to students, piano students, who come to me, and they seem to think that if they learn enough piano, then maybe someday they will be able to start improvising or making up their own music. Now, for some students, they're content to leave it at that. But some of my students, I just tell them that, there's no reason you have to wait. You could just start right now. And for these students, they don't want to wait. They just want to get going. And if you're like that, I say, why not just get going? If you're writing a poem, if you want to write poetry, start. Try writing poetry. Read poetry and then write poetry. Imitate the poets that you appreciate. Try it out. Maybe somewhere down the line you decide to, take your poetry to someone to learn, quote unquote, officially. Maybe you don't, but why wait for someone else to give you that approval or that permission? Or that sense of legitimacy. Many artists are self-taught or partially self-taught. I am self-taught, I'm partially self-taught, and I'm also I also learned from others. I would say that, college and high school, where I learned, I got the bulk of my official education on music, was really helpful. By and large, it was very, very helpful to learn from people and take classes and learn from private teachers, piano, music, and music concepts. However, it was probably so helpful to me because I was already trying things out. I was already attempting to learn these things, whether playing piano or writing music or just simply understanding concepts. And these formal training helped me be better. But the initial, experimentation, the initial desire following my enthusiasm got me going in the first place. And I think a strong sense of self-initiative and personal exploration is really important if you're going to fully develop as an artist. And also, to be clear, I'm not just talking about someone who's technically good, but if you want to be an artist with your own unique voice, then how else are you going to develop that voice? If not through experimentation, if not through trying things out, if not through creating. Creating will help you develop your unique voice. And this is all there is to creating, folks. Every single person listening can go right now and you could start creating something in your chosen medium. Right this instant, you could start. There's nothing that could stop you. The only thing that could stop you is if you were overly censoring yourself or overly hard on yourself. But again, this is not about having to be good. The need to be good has stopped many a promising or would-be artist from getting going because it just is a trap when we worry about that stuff. This is all about play. It's all about creativity. And the little secret here, which I've been alluding to this whole time, is that those people who are really good at this whole thing called creativity probably did a lot of play, and a lot of play which may not have been all that good if you had to evaluate it, in order to get to where they are. And you're hopefully you're nodding your head because you know what I mean. Maybe you've experienced this yourself. I remember a classmate back in college who was an art student, and he had a project where he had to draw the same image. I forget if it was 100 times or something like that. He had to just draw it over and over again. It might have been a still life or something like that. And it might have even been painting as well. But he had to recreate an image of that thing that many times. And what was the value of that? Well, I can only speculate here. I think that when you do it over and over again, you have a lot of chances to do imperfect art so that you can grow, you can sharpen your saw and improve your skills. And when you're improvising and experimenting, that's what you get to do. It's not about having to be perfect. It's the exact opposite mindset of the, analytical, we got to do this well kind of thing. It's more of just simply creation and trial and error. All right, so I think I've made my point here. So now what I'm going to do is actually, before closing out, just give you one more piano improvisation just for fun. But first, I just want to say, to kind of wrap all this up, why does this all matter? Because if you're truly committed to being the artist that you want to be, then a strong, well-developed, confident sense of self and your artistry is important. And personally, I've found that the way that I developed that, say on the piano, was through becoming at home with this instrument. And I didn't become at home with this instrument merely by being in the practice room or by taking lessons or by seeing wonderful, great musicians or by taking music theory. I became at home with this instrument by playing it. And certainly a lot of that might have been playing other people's music, but a lot of it was simply making my own in whatever form that took. Maybe it was just experimenting with chords, and maybe in some cases it was just playing by ear something else that I wanted to play. But some sort of authorship, some sort of ownership had to come into being here. And it certainly was the case for me. And I think improvisation is a great way to create that ownership. And again, you call it whatever you want to call it, improvisation, experimentation, trial and error. So I hope the same can be said for you in your art. If not, I encourage you this instant to start experimenting, to make it a part of your plan. I had a class recently where my students' homework was to go home and improvise. And I gave them a specific couple of chords and a simple way to do it, so they had a framework to work with. But, as I said, what could be more fun than this? All right, so now I'm going to give you one more little improvisation. Here we go. Okay, so this concludes this episode of the Artist Mindset Podcast. And thank you for listening. I hope you found it inspiring. And furthermore, if you liked something in particular about what you heard and you want to, please let me know what you like about this podcast, what makes it interesting for you, and what maybe you would like to hear more of. We've had several guests so far. I posted 3 guest interviews, and several of these sort of me talking to you. And today was a little bit of a sort of music lesson where we got hands-on here, and I hope you found it inspiring. And I want to hear from you. So thank you again for listening, and have a great day. Peace, and keep up the art.